Morning. Hi, everybody. This is Harriet Cammock coming to you to talk about something that I know is on all of our minds. I'm putting my iPad away. Do you like the screen? Look at that. Look at that. Right? My daughter Alexandra designed the background. It's kind of pink, which is one of my favorite colors. And probably that has a lot to do with the fact that as head of household and as mom and everything else that comes with it, in the last 10 years or so, I find I wear a lot of pink and I surround myself with pink. But today I want to talk to you about common ground. And I'm sure this is something that most of us can identify with. How do we identify those situations that are common to all of us, to all our experiences? And in today's changing landscape, whether our landscape is business or entertainment, or whether our landscape is just family and home, or whether our landscape is a startup business, whatever it is, there are some things that we can all identify and find in common. Just recently, overnight, here in Metro Detroit, most of us were very alarmed to discover that on one of the major freeways, that is one of our intra-connected freeways, there was a shooting, and it occurred because someone had an accident, something, not a major deal, like a bumper clipper, and one person pulled over, and the person who was hit came out with guns blazing. I mean, he came out with a rifle, and then he took out all the guns in his car. Altogether, there were 12 guns on the ground. After rush hour, it was sometime after 6 p.m. In some other places, it would be rush hour at this time of the year. Kids are out of school, so people get home really early and so on. And it was just amazing that no one could find common ground. And it's just a reminder to all of us, when we have accidents, don't go to the other person, call the police, sit in the car, wait for the authorities to show up, and then you deal with it. But as I saw the news clip, and I myself was just about to drive through that area on my way to my next activity, I began to think about common ground. I began to think about what were the common instances that brought those two folks together. And I say this with all honesty, so many times in our lives, the one thing that we forget that happens is our common ground, is our commonality. Many times we fail to identify those areas in which we could collaborate, and those areas in which we synchronize, and if we synergize our activities, we would actually achieve a greater good. Recently, I was talking on the phone to a friend of mine who lives in DC. And we were talking about, as we go through life, we observe that there are certain scenarios in our lives. There are certain seasons. And one of them is at a certain time of the year, then I experience what you would refer to as a financial drought. And then I experience a bounty right after that. Well, he found that ironically that the opposite was true for him. At the time when I'm experiencing drought is the time when he's experiencing bounty. So I said, you know what that tells me? That tells me that what we ought to do as friends and what we ought to do as a community of believers is when you're down, when you're in your drought, that's when I'm bountiful, that's when I help. And when I'm down, that's when you help. And we don't have to worry about it being alone or something like that, because it's going to come around. I have found that in the Islamic faith and in the Muslim culture, they identify their commonalities really well. There's something like 1.2 or 3 billion Muslims in the world, or more than that, don't quote me. But they identify their commonalities. Have you noticed that one of the things they do, they pray 5 times per day? They have set times in Eastern time zones, in Pacific time zones, and in other time zones when they pray. All over the world, wherever they are, they go to pray at that time. They go to mosque on Wednesdays at a specific time, right? They also pray at specific times facing the east. Do you see what I'm saying? So regardless of whether you are from, the United Arab Emirates, or you're from Pakistan, or you're from some country in Africa, or somewhere in Indonesia, if you're a Muslim, the common ground that you have is that you pray 5 times per day and you kneel on the floor facing east on a prayer rug. This is what I'm saying to all of us. We must identify those areas in our lives where we have common ground. And it's time for us to begin the collaborative efforts to synergize our activities and to bring that synergy into our businesses. What we're finding is that too often we sit on the sidelines, criticize one another, tear down one another, knowing that you have a resource that can help someone else get further. And if they get further, then they pull you up. And when you get further, you pull someone else up. That's how we're to look at life. That's what our common ground is. As African Americans, we have a common ground. We have the shared historic experience of slavery, of being descendants of slaves. Many of us, like myself, are multi-ethnic, so I have the shared multi-ethnic environment with many others, right? So we bring all of this together, and instead of disparaging against one another, instead of tearing one another down and tearing at each other, it's the system that is wrong. And I've said this so many times, when we hate one another, when women hate women, you really should be hating the system and not the other woman, because it's the system that creates the dislocation. When we hate each other, Muslims against Christians, Christians fighting against Christians, it's the system and not the individual. So just as the scripture says that we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers and rulers of darkness in high places, how apropos is that when you apply it to today's political landscape, today's religious landscape, today's social landscape? You begin to realize that there are forces behind the reasons why we react the way we do. So what are you going to do today about finding common ground, even in your families, even at home? You and your spouse are tearing each other apart. Find your common ground. Find something that is common, that you defend, something that you say, this is my non-negotiable. This is something that I absolutely believe. We're a family together. This is what we stand for. Fight for that common ground. Fight for your common ground. Whatever it is that comes to you that is your common ground, that you must stand on, that you stand for, fight for it. Stay in the fight with it and believe for it, and it must come to pass. My name is Harriet Cammock. Join me on the Harriet Cammock Show today as we talk about common ground. And make sure you go to my website, www.theexodusfoundation.com. I'm sorry, www.theexodusfoundation.com, and make a donation today. We also book me to speak at your next event. You can go to mainexpression.com and look for me on their page, or you can simply reach out to us at www.harrietcammock.org. And of course, my books are available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble on a plethora of sites. Thank you so much, everybody. Be blessed. Common ground, huh?